The Muslim Apostate Girl and Her Infidel Christian Lover. Book 2. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This story is narrated in 3 books. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages in a review to be printed in a newspaper, magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the actual life of a Muslim apostate girl in Sudan. Therefore, all names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or locales is entirely coincidental. Chapter 62. The Atrocities of the Islamic Invasions. In this chapter and the next chapter, the genius Sudanese author Dr. Ibtihal applied her new method of the demonic spiritual interpretations of the Quran and Hadiths and proved how much death, rape, slavery, and destruction the Muslim mujahideen caused in the non-Muslim world. Those mujahideen invited in their bodies the demons through the recitations of the Quran and invaded the infidel world. The bloody Islamic invasions of the countries of Christians and other non-Muslims continued after the assassination of the second Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. Before Omar was justly killed by the brave Persian slave Abu Lu'lu'a the Victorious, who practiced the vigilante justice, a Muslim leader led his mujahideen fighters without informing the Caliph Omar and marched toward the invasion of Egypt. At first, the Caliph Omar expressed his disapproval of such a step without his permission. Nevertheless, when the Caliph learned that his leader, Amir ibn al-As, had succeeded in invading Alexandria, he gave his approval to the campaign. There are 2 important things to mention regarding this invasion. First of all, Amir ibn al-As informed the Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab that he found an exceptionally large library in Alexandria which had over 1 million books. The Caliph replied back and instructed him that every book that doesn't honor Islam and exalt Allah, burn it. At that time, the Alexandrian library was the greatest library in the Western world. It contained books on theology, philosophy, history, and various branches of science. Following the order of the ignorant and illiterate Caliph of Medina, Amir ibn al-As set all the books aflame. Some historians said that the fire and smoke continued for 6 months before every book was fully consumed and destroyed. The decision of the second Caliph of Islam became a guiding principle for Muslim troops wherever they went. Everywhere they went, they destroyed Christian churches and Hindu temples and burned to ashes the infidels' libraries. Sometimes, beautiful buildings of Christian churches were spared and converted into Muslim mosques. The Coptic Christians of Egypt agreed to pay the jizya to the second Caliph, and therefore he allowed them to continue following their religion. The Caliph Omar appointed Amir ibn al-As the Wali of Egypt, or governor. Initially, Amir ibn al-As did something which made all the Copts be happy. It happened to be their great spiritual leader, the Patriarch of Alexandria, the Pope of the Coptic Orthodox Church. Benjamin went into hiding for 11 years from the Byzantine authority. The Copts approached Amir ibn al-As and requested him to restore their fugitive Patrick Benjamin. Amir accepted their request and restored their spiritual leader. But such favor was met with another huge demand of jizya by the Caliph Omar. Amir ibn al-As tried to convince his caliph that he is demanding too much from the Copts of Egypt. The caliph said, enriching of the Medina is more important than robbing Egypt. In other words, rob the Egyptians for the enrichment of the Muslims of Medina, the capital of the Islamic Caliphate. During their invasions of Egypt, Muslim mujahideen had killed thousands of Christian Egyptians and captured many Coptic women. They had sent over 5,000 Coptic Christian captive girls as female slaves to Medina City. None of those Christian girls was allowed to return to Egypt. All those Coptic Egyptian girls were raped by their Muslim captors without marriage because they were considered to be female slaves. After the assassination of the second Caliph Omar, he was succeeded by Osman ibn Affan. During the Caliphate of Osman, Muslims invaded Libya, Tunisia, and Algeria, and reached up to Morocco. The Berber Christian tribes of North Africa caused a severe problem for the Muslim invaders. Whenever they invaded a city and forcibly converted its inhabitants from Christianity to Islam and moved to the next city, the former city would apostatize. Then, they had to return and reinvade and reconvert the citizens of that city. Many Berbers were killed during those processes. The Berbers managed to murder the main military commander of the Muslims, Uqba ibn Nafi. He was the nephew of Amir ibn al-As. He was ambushed and killed by Kausala, leader of the Araba tribe of the Berber people, and the Christian head of the Sanhaja Confederation. In the meantime, the third rightly guided Caliph Osman ibn Affan was murdered inside his house by Muslims due to his corruption and bad leadership. Ali ibn Abi Talib was appointed the fourth and last rightly guided caliph. Ali's caliphate did not last for long before he was also assassinated by another Muslim. After the death of Ali, his rival Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, Wali or governor of Syria, declared himself caliph and began the royal Umayyad dynasty, which made Damascus its main capital. When Uqba ibn Nafi was murdered by the Berbers in North Africa, the Umayyad caliph in Damascus sent a new Muslim military commander, Musa ibn Nusair, which means Musa the son of a small Christian man. From his name, it is clear that Musa was born as a Christian but had been forcibly converted to Islam. His story began when he was a small Christian boy living in a monastery in Syria with some Syrian monks. He was under training to learn the Bible and theology, and then when he grows up, he would become a monk. Khalid ibn al-Walid invaded the monastery, slaughtered all the monks, and took him captive. Khalid forcibly converted him to Islam and made him a slave in his house. Being converted and brought up by such an outstanding military general of Islam turned out to be a great honor for Musa ibn Nusair. The Christian boy was brainwashed and turned into a bitter enemy of Jesus and his followers. When he was grown up, he became an outstanding military general of the Islamic troops. He was assigned by the Umayyad caliphs the task of reclaiming North Africa to Islam. Musa ibn Nusair, Moses the son of a small Christian man, learned from the mistake of the slain Muslim leader, Uqba ibn Nafi, and started to move slowly and convert the Berbers, today known as the Arab Amazigh, to Islam. Uqba converted the entire region of North Africa, today Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Niger, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Morocco, in just a few months. Musa ibn Nusair took a few years to accomplish the same task. The Mujahideen of Musa ibn Nusair had killed many Berber Christians and captured thousands of their young women as female slaves. They had sent around 30,000 Berber Christian girls as female slaves to the Umayyad Caliph in Damascus. Those captive girls would be forced to walk half-naked in his palace, and he and his other male relatives, officials, and guards could rape a female slave at any time and rape her as a dog raped its bitch. Islam teaches that the awara or nakedness of the female slave is from her belly button to her knees. Her breasts and thighs must remain open, and if she puts on hijab and abaya, she would be beaten up. The Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab used to beat any female slave who dared to put on hijab and abaya and cover her breasts and thighs and hips. The majority of those Berber female slaves were sold in the slave markets in Damascus city. At any rate, after subduing and forcibly converting the Berber Christian tribes to Islam, Musa ibn Nusair began to think of moving to the Iberian Peninsula, today Spain and Portugal. However, Musa knew that he was growing old and such a task needed a young and strong commander. Surprisingly, such a commander turned out to be one of the defeated and subdued Berbers, Tariq ibn Ziyad. Those who fought for so long against the invaders and tried to keep their Christian faith in a few years were turned into Muslim invaders themselves. Tariq ibn Ziyad was a fierce and successful Muslim commander. He was nicknamed the Khalid ibn al-Walid of the Berbers. Tariq ibn Ziyad made a solemn vow to convert Europe entirely until Rome and capture it for Islam. Muslims claimed that the Prophet Muhammad promised them that they would invade and open Constantinople and Rome, the two great capitals of Christendom, and turn the entire Christian world Muslim. History shows they tried for 7 centuries to invade and capture Constantinople, but they failed. Even so, the so-called prophecy of their false prophet was partially fulfilled when the Ottoman Sultan, Muhammad II, Muhammad the Conqueror, captured and destroyed Constantinople in 1453, modern-day Istanbul. After they brought an end to the Byzantine Empire, the Muslim Ottomans destroyed half of Europe in order to fulfill that prophecy, but it didn't work. Muslims still hold to the false prophecy and believe one day they will invade and take Rome, the capital of Italy and the center of the Roman Catholic Church. Tariq ibn Ziyad succeeded in invading Spain and converting thousands of its Christian population into Islam. According to Dr. Bill Warner, in Spain, Muslims made piles of Christian heads, slain in battle, that men on horsebacks could not see each other across. Tariq continued to take city after city, and in a brief time, he converted much of the population into Islam. But Tariq needed more mujahideen because the Iberian Peninsula was too big for his small army of 12,000. He sent for his master and leader, Musa ibn Nusair, who was living in the city of Al-Kairouan, Tunisia. Musa forwarded the demand of Tariq to the Caliph at Damascus. By this time, the capital of the Islamic State was changed twice. From Medina was moved by the fourth Caliph Ali to Kufa in Iraq. When Ali was murdered, it was moved by the Caliph Muawiyah to Damascus. Finally, the Abbasid caliphs would move it back to Baghdad, today the capital of Iraq. As soon as the Muslims of Arabia and Levant heard that a big door for jihad in the way of Allah was opened in Europe, hundreds of thousands of them gathered from Yemen, Iraq, Mecca, Medina, Damascus, Palestine, and Egypt. The numbers of the new mujahideen had far exceeded what Tariq needed. Therefore, the caliph selected 18,000 strong fighters and sent the rest back to their places. After supplying the new troops, the caliph sent a letter and demanded that Tariq ibn Ziyad should send him 3,000 blonde virgins, young white girls. When the letter reached Tariq ibn Ziyad, he fulfilled the demand of his caliph and sent the 3,000 captured Christian teenage girls. Those young Christian teenage girls would be ordered to roam bare-naked inside the palace. Anytime, the caliph or one of his top officials and male relatives could grab one of those captive females and rape her without the need of marrying her. He wouldn't care if his sex victim dies during the rape process. Islam permits him to have sex with his female slaves without the need of marrying them. Surah Al-Nisa 4, verse number 3. This evil pandering in human flesh established a direct relationship between Tariq ibn Ziyad and the Caliph of Damascus, which led him to ignore the orders of his master, Musa ibn Nusair, the Wali of North Africa. Musa understood that Tariq was pulling rank in him. Out of jealousy, he commanded Tariq to stop his rapid conquests and wait until he would come to Andalusia. Andalusia was the ancient name of the Iberian Peninsula. Tariq ibn Ziyad refused to obey Musa and continued to conquer city after city. I wonder, while Tariq and his satanic mujahideen were invading, killing, raping, enslaving, and converting the Christians of Spain to Islam by the sword, why the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, the kings of Europe, and the Byzantine Emperor at Constantinople were all silent and closed their eyes to the slaughter and suffering of their Christian brothers and sisters in the Iberian Peninsula. When Musa ibn Nusair reached the newly conquered lands with an army from Morocco under the leadership of his son, they also invaded many cities in the western region before they met with Tariq ibn Ziyad. When Musa ibn Nusair reached Tariq ibn Ziyad, he humiliated him in front of his troops. He tied him with ropes and severely flogged him with whips for daring to disobey his orders. Most probably, the news of this fight between those two big military commanders reached the ears of the Caliph at Damascus. Therefore, without giving any explanation, the Caliph ordered both commanders to halt their jihad invasions and return immediately to Damascus. When the two reached Damascus, Tariq ibn Ziyad mysteriously disappeared, and no one knew anything about him. Musa ibn Nusair was sent to Mecca for pilgrimage and died mysteriously in Medina. The disappearances of those two ruthless commanders diminished the military power of the Muslim army in Andalusia and finally led to their crushing defeat by the Frankish king, Charles Martel, at the Battle of Tours on October 10, 732. The decisive battle was fought between the huge Muslim army under the leadership of Abdulrahman Ghaffiji of 30,000 mujahideen fighters and the Frankish army of 25,000 soldiers under the command of Charles Martel. Muslim historians exaggerated and put the number of the Frankish army to 400,000 soldiers. The Muslim army continued to advance in Europe and invaded South France. It kept on conquering, looting, raping, enslaving, forcibly converting, and advancing until it reached 30 miles away from the capital city, Paris. On their way to Paris, the Muslims invaded many Frankish villages, towns, and cities and collected a substantial number of booties. Many of the Muslim mujahideen felt that they had gotten enough spoils and needed to go back to Andalusia and return another time to invade the capital of the infidels. Nevertheless, their commander, Abdul Rahman Ghaffiji, insisted on continuing to Paris. He believed in the promise of his prophet that great and blessed Muslim commanders were going to invade and capture Rome and Constantinople. Moreover, at the time of the Battle of Tours, the Islamic military power reached its zenith. By then, it was the most powerful army in the entire world. At that time, Europe was not united under one military power. Therefore, the leader of the Moors was an entirely full confidant of victory. Arabs, Berbers, and Christians of Andalusia who were converted to Islam were known as Moors. The Franks just wanted to defend their country from the invading army. When the two armies met and the battle began, the Muslim mujahideen were showing superiority and the battle in their favor. Even so, Charles Martel, the commander of the Frankish army, understood the mentality of the Muslim Moors and knew exactly where their weak point lay. He understood that the Muslims were fighting for the booties, especially the women and wealth of the infidels. That interest did not surpass their interest in converting the infidels to Islam. They knew that if an infidel converts to Islam, then they cannot take his women and wealth. But if he remains an infidel Christian, then the Muslim mujahideen have the right to either kill him and get all his possession, women, wealth, cattle, and property, or force him to pay the jizya in gold. Modern historical research proved that the early Muslim mujahideen never carried copies of the Quran with them, but had only their swords, spears, and horses on them. Before the Battle of Tours, the Moorish mujahideen had already accumulated huge heaps of booty. The Moors kept their booty at the rear, leaving a few mujahideen guards. Charles Martel, with a small force, attacked the booty, killing the Muslim guards and setting the huge heaps of the loot on fire. The Muslim Moors felt as if someone was setting their own families on fire. Therefore, they broke their ranks and ran to save their booty. Such action led to confusion among the mujahideen. Their leaders lost control of the ranks. Immediately, the Franks ambushed the Moors and began to kill them. Some historians said that the mujahideen were so confused that they began to kill each other. Their main commander, Abdul Rahman Ghaffiji, was also killed in the melee. When their commander was slain, the Muslims began to flee from the battleground, leaving their booty and their dead. It was a great victory for the Franks. Charles Martel emerged as a great hero and a savior of the West. He was nicknamed by the Pope of Rome, Charles Martel, which means Charles the Hammer. The Pope borrowed the name from the Jewish commander, Judas Maccabeus, in Hebrew Judas the Hammer, who defeated the Syrians under Antiochus IV in 165 BC and rededicated the temple in the city of Jerusalem. Many historians believed that the Battle of Tours saved Christianity and Western civilization. Some historians believed that had the Muslim Moors won the Battle of Tours, Europe would be today an Arabian continent, and the Europeans would be Muslims speaking the Arabic language. The casualties of the Frankish army were 1,100 dead, while the Muslim army lost 12,000 mujahid, including their main leader, Abdul Rahman Ghaffiji. After their crushing defeat at the Battle of Poitiers or Tours, Muslim Moors never dared again invade France or try to advance in Western Europe. Howbeit, they continued to attack Constantinople for 700 years until they captured and destroyed it in the year 1453 AD. Millions of the Christian citizens of the Byzantine Empire fled to Europe and Russia. Those who remained were forcibly converted to Islam. Today, 99% of the Muslims of Turkey, their ancestors, were once Orthodox Christians of Anatolia, which was part of the lost Byzantine Empire. Some historians said that the Second Rome, Constantinople, did not fall, but it moved to Russia and Moscow became the Third Rome. According to Dr. Bill Warner, Islam always inspires fear in the hearts of Westerners. How North Africa changed from being a Christian to a Muslim. How Arab countries changed from Christian to Muslim countries. 25 years before the advent of Islam, the Persians and the Byzantines had a massive war in which one-third of the population died. One-third of the Byzantine Empire was destroyed by the Black Death, or bubonic plague. Dr. Bill Warner said, there were 548 battles waged by the early Islamic mujahideen. According to Dr. Bill Warner, the classical Western civilization did not collapse because of the invasions of the Germanic tribes, but it had been destroyed by the Islamic invasions. Muhammad sent fighters to all Arab tribes to offer them Islam. If they refused to accept the offer of Islam, they were summarily annihilated. Muhammad sent his chief commander, Khalid ibn al-Walid, to the largest Arab tribe known as Jassima. The ruthless Muslim leader Khalid destroyed the entire tribe's male members because they rejected the offer of Islam and decided to fight. Their women and children were taken as captives, women got raped, and children were sold in slave markets. At the Battle of Qadisiyah, in July 636 AD, Khalid cut the head of the Persian commander and raped his wife on the ground. Her husband's blood was spilled. The Muslim man Khalid followed the example of his false prophet Muhammad, who killed at the invasion of the Jewish city of Khaybar the Jewish leader, Kanana ibn Rabia, and took his wife, Safiya bint Huyai, and raped her on the same day he murdered her husband and Jewish people. During the Wars of Apostasy, Khalid killed an Arab leader, known as Malik ibn Niyara, cooked and ate his head, and raped his wife Layla bint al-Minhal at the same time. At the Battle of Ulals, in May 633, in Iraq, Khalid and his mujahideen continued to put the losers of the battle in bags and cut off their heads until the river ran red with their blood. The Muslim mujahideen had slain the entire Persian army, which consisted of 30,000 to 35,000 soldiers. Chapter 63. The Brutalities of the Islamic Invasions. In this chapter, the genius Sudanese Muslim apostate girl who has a photographic memory continued to narrate her demonic spiritual interpretations of the Islamic bloody history. Dr. Bill Warner continued to say that the second Caliph Omar's troops invaded the Levant and Jerusalem, and those Jews and Christians who refused the compulsory offer of Islam were turned into dhimmis, third-class citizens and semi-slaves. The dhimmis are the Jews or Christians who agreed to pay the jizya in pure gold to Muslims. Many of the Arab Christians could not afford to pay the jizya and hence forcibly converted to Islam. During the so-called Golden Age of Islam, during the Royal Abbasid dynasty, Muslims attacked the Sindh region in India and killed 26,000 Hindus in one single battle. Armenian nobles fled and took refuge in a church. The building was destroyed and all were burned inside. At Ephesus city, 7,000 Greek Christians were enslaved. All new churches were destroyed. In Egypt and Syria, 30,000 churches were burned down and destroyed. In Thessalonica, 22,000 Greek Christians were enslaved. In Seville, thousands of Christians were massacred. 6,000 Jews of Morocco were killed. Hundreds of Jews in Cordoba were killed. 4,000 Christians of Granada were killed. Georgia and Armenia invaded. In another battle in Hindustan, India, 15,000 were killed and 500,000, 500,000 Hindus, enslaved, most of them young girls and children. In Yemen, the Jews were given two choices: convert to Islam or die. Christians of Granada were deported to Morocco. In India, many cities were destroyed, and Hindus were told to convert or die. Muslim commanders boasted among themselves about who would make the biggest and tallest hills of Hindu skulls. Some of them gained the titles of the idol smashers. Thousands of Hindu girls were raped, and untold numbers of children were enslaved. In one town, 20,000 Hindus were enslaved. Many Buddhist monks were butchered, and thousands of Buddhist nuns were raped by the Muslim mujahideen. Damascus and Safed were invaded, and mass-murdered Christians were. In Marrakesh, Jews were massacred, and in Tabriz, Jews were forcibly converted. The Cairo riots led to churches being burned. The Mongol Muslim commander, Timur, killed as many as 90,000 Hindus in one day. He gained the title of the evilest man ever lived. In another battle, Tamerlane massacred 30,000 surrendered Hindus in cold blood. He devastated 700 Hindu villages. Tamerlane also invaded Iraq and completely annihilated Nestorian and Jacobite Christians. Half of the population of Afghanistan were Christians, but Tamerlane's Mujahideen made it completely Muslim. Another Muslim leader, called Tughlaq, took 180,000 Hindus as slaves. After 700 years of continuous attacks, Islam captured and destroyed Constantinople in the year 1453. The son of Tamerlane, Babur, invaded India and destroyed thousands of Hindu temples and forced conversions. Muslim generals built 2 tall towers of human heads after their victories. Noble Hindu women committed mass suicides to avoid sexual slavery and rape by Muslim Mujahideen. According to Bill Warner, the Jews of Persia, modern-day Iran and Iraq, and Yemen were forced to convert and followed by forced conversions of Greek Christians to Islam. In Persia, also persecutions of Zoroastrians increased, and those who survived the massacres fled to India. In India, 600,000 Hindus were killed by Akbar, the greatest Muslim Mughal emperor. Jews of Jeddah were expelled, and Jews of Morocco were brutally massacred. Forced conversions of Jews in Iran were uncountable. Zoroastrians were annihilated in Iran. Jews of Baghdad were massacred. About 250,000 Armenian Christians were slaughtered in Turkey. In the 20th century, over 1,500,000 Turkish Armenian Christians were killed in jihad, the Armenian genocide of 1915. In 15 years, the entire Persian Empire was defeated and converted to Islam. In 25 years, Islam spread from China to Tunisia in North Africa. Nevertheless, Islam could not destroy the entire Byzantine Empire. In an abbreviated period, it took 2/3 of its lands, in Levant, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain. No empire in human history lasted as long as the Byzantine Empire. That great Christian empire lasted for 1,123 years. The Roman Empire lasted for 800 years, the Islamic Ottoman Empire for 500 years, and the Chinese Manchu Empire for 300 years. The Christian Emperor Justinian built the dome of Hagia Sophia Church. Muslims later changed that church into a mosque. The Byzantine Empire stretched from Serbia, Bulgaria, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Israel or Palestine, Syria, and part of Italy, and had 1,000 cities. Unfortunately, the demise of this great Christian empire was caused by the Fourth Crusade. In the year 1204, the Republic of Venice hired the Fourth Crusaders from French, German, and Italian contingents. Instead of liberating the Holy Land from pagan Muslims, those crusaders invaded and sacked Constantinople. The Orthodox Christian Byzantines considered the Catholic Crusaders to be brothers in the Christian faith, and hence they were not prepared for the attack. After invading and controlling Constantinople, the Catholic Crusaders continued to rob the wealth of the Orthodox Empire. For 50 uninterrupted years, all the treasures and gold of the empire were carried away. Besides that, earthquakes and plagues weakened the Byzantine Empire. The city of Constantinople had recovered after 50 years, but the Byzantine Empire could never recover from the barbaric assault of the Fourth Crusade. In the year 1453, Sultan Muhammad II of the Ottoman Empire used military cannons and destroyed the 3 walls of Constantinople. Those deadly military cannons were made by a Christian Westerner trader who sold himself to the Muslim Sultan Muhammad II. That trader approached first the Byzantine emperor and offered his new weapons. When the Byzantine emperor could not afford to give him what he wanted, he turned to the enemy and sold his deadly merchandise to them. The military cannons allowed the Ottomans to finally destroy the 3 walls of the strongly fortified city of Constantinople. When Sultan Muhammad II took the city, he gathered all the rich citizens and chopped off their heads, and had their bodies thrown to the dogs. It is said that the Sultan killed the rich Christian citizens of Constantinople because they refused to lend money to their emperor to purchase the deadly cannons. The Muslim Ottomans laid a siege to the city with an army of 200,000 men. At that time, Constantinople was defended by 7,000 men, of whom 2,000 were foreigners. The Sultan's troops were consisting of the Turkish, Anatolians, and Janissaries. Janissaries were Christian children who were kidnapped by Muslims from Christian villages, towns, and cities. Those kidnapped Christian children were forcibly converted to Islam. After that, they were trained in military warfare. Those children would grow up without family attachments, and they were loyal only to the Ottoman Sultan. They were neither allowed to get married nor have children. They would send them to invade Christian lands. Those kidnapped children who converted from Christianity to Islam, the Janissaries, were known as the killing machine. The Sultan used them to destroy half of Europe and Asia. Through them, the Ottoman Empire captured all of Arabia and North Africa. Accordingly, those killing machines were the main cause behind the defeat and capture of Constantinople, which marked the demise of the greatest Western Christian empire. The last battle marked the end of the greatest empire in human history, an empire that lasted for 1,123 years. Constantinople city's fall was a massive blow to Christendom. Pope Nicholas V immediately ordered a counterattack, but his sudden death put an end to that plan. Many Greek Christians fled the city and migrated to other parts of Europe, in particular Italy. Their arrival ignited the Renaissance. Many scholars believed that the fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. Many Greek Orthodox Christians also fled to Russia. Russia became the spiritual successor of the Byzantine Empire. Some historians said that the Great Byzantine Empire did not fall, but it moved to the east and Moscow became the Third Rome. The year 410 AD was considered the year Rome first fell when the barbarians invaded it. But historians believed that the Western Empire, the Roman Empire, did not fall until 476 AD after the barbarian leader, Odoacer, deposed the last emperor Romulus, and that marked the final fall of Rome. Odoacer established himself as the leader of Italy. The glory of Rome was ended when a pagan leader made himself a king in Rome. In fact, at that time only the western half of Rome fell. The Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, continued to exist in the area called Byzantium. By the year 1000, two-thirds of the Christian world was possessed by the Muslim invaders. Out of the important 5 ancient Christian cities, 3 were taken by Muslims: Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria. Only Constantinople and Rome still remained in the hands of Christians. Muslims believe until today that these 2 Christian cities are also destined by Allah for them. They claimed that their prophet Muhammad told them that they were going to invade and possess Constantinople and Rome. In 1453, they took the 4th city of Constantinople and changed its name to Istanbul. Today, only Rome remained in the hands of the Catholic Christians. Islam became the superpower of the medieval world. Each year brought forth new Mujahideen invasions, and with that Muslims gained new possessions of Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist lands, women, children, and wealth of the so-called infidels. In the year 1071, the Turks invaded Asia Minor and possessed the region of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. The inhabitants of this large region were new converts to Islam. They were invaded and converted by the sword. They were like the Berber Christian tribes of North Africa. They were not Arabs, but had migrated from Asia to the region of Asia Minor. They became more zealous than those who had converted them by the sword to Islam. They behaved like the Muslim Mongol great Ghazi Tamerlane, who turned against other Muslims and invaded and captured their countries. After their forcible conversion to Islam, the Muslim Turks turned against their Arab masters and attacked them. They took Syria and Palestine from the Arab Muslims and began their own caliphate, Ottoman Sultanate or Empire. Since the Prophet Muhammad said in one of his authentic hadiths, only an Arab Muslim from the Quraysh tribe can be appointed caliph, therefore the Turks called their caliphs, the Muslim sultans, and their caliphate, the Ottoman Sultanate. The last Arab Abbasid caliphate was destroyed by the Mongols under Genghis Khan in the year 1258. On February 13, 1258, Halid, the main general commander of Genghis Khan's troops, invaded Baghdad and assassinated the last Abbasid caliph, Al-Mustasim Billah, and ended that 500-year-old caliphate. Nevertheless, the Mongols picked up the Islamic virus, and soon they too would be converted to Islam and would wreak havoc of unceasing Islamic invasions and convert millions to Islam in Asia and Eastern Europe and Russia. Those invasions were done by the Muslim great Ghazi Tamerlane, the evilest man ever lived. We see the same pattern with the Berbers, Turks, and Mongols, all forcibly converted to Islam, contaminated to a greater degree, spreading their increasingly virulent contagion. Then, those newly converts became two deadly tools in the hands of Satan and invaded, destroyed, raped, enslaved, and forcibly converted millions to Islam. The evilest Muslim commander, Tamerlane, was a Mongol warrior who was Turkishized and a convert to Islam. He claims direct descent from Genghis Khan. His name Tamerlane is an English corruption of his real name Timur. He was known as Timur the Lame because when he was a young boy, he stole a small lamb or goat and got shot with a long-range bow by a shepherd, and that rendered him lame for the rest of his life. Tamerlane means Timur the Lame Man. At first, Tamerlane called himself the Sword of Islam. According to Islamic tradition, the honorable title of the Sword of Islam was bestowed by the Prophet Muhammad on his military genius, Khalid ibn al-Walid. Tariq ibn Ziyad was nicknamed Khalid ibn al-Walid of the Berber tribes. After conquering many lands in Asia and Europe, Tamerlane decided to declare himself the new Muslim caliph, but was told by Muslim scholars that he couldn't be a caliph because he wasn't an Arab. In fact, not every Muslim Arab can be a caliph unless he was from the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad. According to Muhammad, his caliph, successor, must be a Muslim man, an Arab man, and a direct descendant of the Prophet's tribe of the Quraysh. Therefore, since the last Abbasid caliph was captured and put in a sack and trodden underfoot and brutally killed by Khalid, Genghis Khan's chief commander, no Muslim man has ever claimed to be a caliph except the contemporary Muslim terrorist leader, Abu Bakr Hussein al-Baghdadi al-Quraishi, the leader of today's ISIS, the Islamic State or Caliphate. For 756 years, no one has claimed that honorific except this terrible leader of the evilest terrorist group ever produced by the religion of peace. Accordingly, young Muslim men and women migrate from all over the world to Turkey, Syria, and Iraq to join the army of the newly resurrected Islamic Caliphate. Al-Baghdadi claimed to be legally caliph, 100% Qurashi man. Following his defeat of the Christian knights who called themselves the Christian Hospitallers and the capture of their stronghold city of Smyrna, Tamerlane changed his title from the Sword of Islam to the Greatest Muslim Ghazi, the greatest Muslim victorious commander. He established a Muslim empire that extended from Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, India, until Kashgar in China. It reached up to Moscow in Russia and Delhi in India. He made his capital in an oasis in the desert in a city known as Samarkand, today the capital of Uzbekistan. His Islamic invasions had caused the deaths of 20 million people. After their victory in the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the Seljuk Turks defeated the Byzantine army and captured Anatolia and Armenia. Islamic invasions of Europe were halted at the gates of Vienna in the year 1683. September 11th of the year of our Lord Jesus 1683 was the day when an alliance of Christian armies led by Jan III Sobieski, the King of Poland, arrived at the gates of Vienna and changed the victory of Muslim mujahideen into crushing defeat. For that reason, Osama bin Laden chose September 11th to carry out his cowardly attacks on the Twin Towers in New York. He wanted to tell the Christian world that Islam is still determined in conquering the Western world and changing it into a Muslim world. Many Westerners are ignorant of their history and hence believe that Islam is a peaceful religion that spread through mere preaching. George Santayana said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." It seems only President Donald Trump has learned and remembered his past. Many people in America and around the world are against his travel ban on refugees and 7 majority Muslim countries: Iran, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, and Somalia. Today, in Western schools and universities, Christianity is presented to the students as bloody religion that caused the death of millions and for a long time blocked scientific discoveries and progress. On the contrary, the Muslim Moors of Spain are taught to students as more knowledgeable and advanced in science, art, medicine, and philosophy than medieval Christianity, which was behind the Dark Ages of Europe. Before the Battle of Vienna, the Muslim Mujahideen, the Ottoman Turks, overrun Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Serbia. They turned Protestant Hungary into a vassal and made war repeatedly on Austria and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Muslim Ottoman Mujahideen set their eyes on Vienna since the fall of the city would open the way into the heart of Austria and southern Germany. Their final target was Rome, the capital of Christendom. They knew if they capture Rome, the second capital of the Western world, then Christianity is doomed. They had failed to take the city of Vienna in the siege of 1529. Under the leadership of the Grand Muslim Vizier, Pasha Kara Mustafa, and with their Muslim Tatar and Malaysian Mujahideen allies, they made their preparations and fought their way towards the capital, overrunning Austrian towns and villages. Wherever the Muslim Mujahideen went, they plundered cities, took slaves, turned churches into mosques, and converted many thousands of Christian captives to Islam at the point of a sword. In 1683, the combined armies of the Ottoman Empire, large and well-equipped forces, laid siege in Vienna. The city was nearing the end of its ability to resist, but just as the capture of Vienna was becoming a matter of time, an army came to its rescue. On September 12th, in an open battle before Vienna, the Muslims had received a crushing defeat, and the city escaped pillage, rape, robbing, and destruction. The chief commander of the army that rescued Vienna was the Polish Christian king, Jan Sobieski. His decisive victory is like that of Charles Martel's victory at the Battle of Tours, Poitiers, in 732, which stopped the advance of Muslim Mujahideen in Western Europe. Likewise, the Polish king, Jan Sobieski, saved Christianity and Western civilization. But Muslims never give up until today. In the past, they failed to defeat and completely annihilate Christianity and convert all Christians to Muslims, but today they are invading the Western world through mass immigration, the influx of illegal immigrants, and multiplying from within through polygamies and lack of birth controls. Most of the above-mentioned brief information about the atrocities of Islamic invasions is based on a lecture by Dr. Bill Warner. In the 548 battles waged by Muslims during the 500 years of spreading Islam, historians estimated that 270 million people were killed, of whom 80 million Hindus and 60 million Christians. It is the bloodiest religion in human history. No other religion in the entire history of mankind on the planet Earth had come even remotely close to the mass murders, rapes, massacres, genocides, destructions, and debris that this so-called religion of peace had done. The Bible said about them, "Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths, and the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes." Romans 3, verses 15 to 17. Note that Islam is the youngest religion among the major religions of the world. Judaism came 2,200 years before Islam, Hinduism 1,700 years, Buddhism 1,200 years, and Christianity 700 years. And none of them had caused such destructions, deaths, rapes, slaveries, and miseries in our world as Islam did and continues to do every day and every hour through the widely spread terrorist attacks and civil wars in Syria, Iraq, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen, Egypt, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, Somalia, Sudan, Europe, America, etc., etc., etc. It all started with a single tyrant who was a demon-possessed evil Arab man called Muhammad. The Hindus and the Islamic invasions. The Prophet Muhammad promised his followers that they would invade and conquer India. His hadiths that speak of the conquest of India are as follows. It was narrated that Thawban, the freed slave of the Messenger of Allah, said, "The Prophet said, there are two groups of my ummah, Islamic community, whom Allah would protect from the fire, a group who would conquer India and a group who would be with Jesus the son of Mary, peace be upon him." Narrated by Imam Ahmed in Al-Musnad, another hadith narrated that Abu Huraira, may Allah be pleased with him, in which he said, "The Messenger of Allah, blessings and peace of Allah be upon him, promised us that we would conquer India." So if I am martyred, I would be among the best of the martyrs, and if I return then I am Abu Huraira the freed, protected from hellfire. Alan Daniela writes, from the time Muslims started arriving, around 632 AD, the history of India becomes a long, monotonous series of murders, massacres, spoliations of rapes, and destructions. It is, as usual, in the name of a holy war of their faith, of their sole God, that the barbarians destroyed civilizations and wiped out entire races. Mahmud Ghazni was an early example of Muslim ruthlessness, burning in 1018 all the temples of Mathura, razing Kannauj to the ground, and destroying the famous temple of Somnath, sacred to all Hindus. His successors were as ruthless as Ghazni. 103 temples in the holy city of Benares were razed to the ground, its marvelous temples destroyed, its magnificent palaces wrecked. The Hindu sage Padmanabha described in his Kanha-Dade Prabandha in 1456 the story of the Muslim invasion of the Gujarat state in 1298. The conquering army burnt villages, devastated the land, plundered people's wealth, took Brahmins and enslaved children and captive women of all classes, flogged them with thongs of rawhide, carried a moving prison with it, and converted the prisoners into obsequious slaves. The blood of the infidels flowed so copiously at Thanissar that the river was discolored, notwithstanding its purity, and people were unable to drink it. The Sultan returned with plunder that was impossible to count. Tariq-i-Yamani of Utbay, the Sultan's secretary, written in the 11th century. The magnitude of crimes credited to Muslim monarchs by medieval Muslim historians was beyond measure. With a few exceptions, Muslim kings and commanders were monsters who stopped at no crime when it came to their Hindu subjects. But what strikes me as more significant is the broad pattern of those crimes. The pattern is that of a jihad in which the Ghazis, invaders, of Islam, 1. Invade infidel lands, 2. Massacre as many infidel men, women, and children, particularly Brahmins, as they like after winning a victory, 3. Capture the survivors to be sold as slaves, 4. Plunder every place and person, 5. Demolish idolatrous places of worship and build mosques in their places, and 6. Defile idols which are flung into public squares or made into steps leading to mosques. Still more significant is the fact that this is exactly the pattern. 1. Revealed by Allah in the Quran. 2. Practiced, perfected, and prescribed by the Prophet in his own lifetime. 3. Followed by the pious caliphs of Islam in the first 35 years of Islamic imperialism. 4. Elaborated in the hadiths and hundreds of commentaries with meticulous attention to detail. 5. Certified by the ulama and the Sufis of Islam in all ages, including our own. And 6. Followed by all Muslim monarchs and chieftains, who aspired for name and fame in this life, and beautiful virgins and boys in the paradise of the hereafter. Goel, 2001. The Story of Islamic Imperialism in India. New Delhi, India. In the year 997, a Turkish chieftain by the name of Mahmud became sultan of the little state of Ghazni in eastern Afghanistan. Pretending a holy zeal for destroying Hindu idolatry, Sultan Mahmud swept across the frontier with a force inspired by a pious aspiration for booty. He met the unprepared Hindus at Bhimnagar, slaughtered them, pillaged their cities, destroyed their temples, and carried away the accumulated treasures of centuries. Returning to Ghazni, he astonished the ambassadors of foreign powers by displaying jewels and unbeard pearls and rubies shining like sparks, or like wine congealed with ice, and emeralds like fresh sprigs of myrtle, and diamonds in size and weight like pomegranates. Each winter the leader of the Muslim invaders Mahmud descended into India, filled his treasure chest with spoils, and amused his men with full freedom to pillage and kill. Each spring he returned to his capital richer than before. At Mathura, on the Jumna, he took from the temple its statues of gold encrusted with precious stones and emptied its coffers of a vast quantity of gold, silver, and jewelry. He expressed his admiration for the architecture of the great shrine, judged that its duplication would cost 100 million dinars and the labor of 200 years, and then ordered it to be soaked with naphtha and burnt to the ground. 6 years later, he sacked another opulent city of northern India, Somnath, killed all its 50,000 inhabitants, and dragged its wealth to Ghazni. In the end, he became, perhaps, the richest king that history has ever known. Sometimes he spared the population of the ravaged cities and took them to his kingdom to be sold as slaves, but so big was the number of such captives that after some years no one could be found to offer more than a few shillings for a slave. Before every important engagement, Mahmud knelt in prayer and asked the blessing of God upon his mujahideen. He reigned for a third of a century, and when he died, full of years and honors, Muslim historians ranked him as the greatest monarch of his time and one of the greatest sovereigns of any age. In 1186, the Ghuri, a Muslim Turkish tribe of Afghanistan, invaded India, captured the city of Delhi, destroyed its temples, confiscated its wealth, and settled down in its palaces to establish the Sultanate of Delhi. An alien despotism fastened upon northern India for 3 centuries and checked only by assassination and revolt. The first of these bloody sultans, Qutb Aibak, was a normal specimen of his kind, fanatical, ferocious, and merciless. His gifts, as the Mohammedan historian tells us, were bestowed by hundreds of thousands, and his slaughters likewise were by hundreds of thousands. In one victory of this warrior, who had been purchased as a slave, 50,000 men came under the collar of slavery, and the plain became black with the Hindus' drops of blood. Another sultan, Balban, punished rebels and brigands by casting them under the feet of elephants or removing their skins, stuffing these with straw, and hanging them from the gates of Delhi. When some Mongol inhabitants who had settled in Delhi and had been converted to Islam attempted a rising, Sultan Alauddin, the invader of Chittor, had all the males, from 15 to 30,000 of them, slaughtered in one day. Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq acquired the throne by murdering his father, became a great scholar and an elegant writer, dabbled in mathematics, physics, and Greek philosophy, surpassed his predecessors in bloodshed and brutality, fed the flesh of a rebel nephew to the rebel's wife and children, ruined the country with reckless inflation, and laid it waste with pillage and murder till the inhabitants fled to the jungle. He killed so many Hindus that, in the words of a Muslim historian, there was constantly in front of his royal pavilion and his civil court a mountain of dead bodies and heaps of corpses, while the sweepers and executioners were wearied out by their work of dragging the victims and putting them to death in crowds. A clear example of the destruction of the Hindu and Buddhist cultures and their temples can be seen in the siege of Dibal by Muhammad bin Qasim and his mujahideen, who marched into India with a large military expedition. In the later part of the siege of Dibal, defectors informed Muhammad about how the temple could be captured. Following their information, the Arabs planted their ladders on the walls of the citadel and stormed over them. Once they took Dibal, the citizens were given the invitation to accept Islam, and upon refusal, the males were slaughtered, and the women and children were taken into slavery. The carnage lasted for 3 days, looting and raping. Their temple was razed and was replaced by a mosque. Muhammad left a garrison of 4,000 soldiers in the town. The spoils of conquest were divided first among the leadership and then the common soldiers, and this would be repeated again and again with continued Islamic conquests. As this was the pattern of all future sieges of Muhammad bin Qasim, as indeed of all future Muslim invaders of Hindustan, it may be repeated. Inhabitants of a captured fort or town were invited to accept Islam or face death. India would face 3 major invasions over the centuries, beginning with the Arabs and continuing with the Seljuk Turks in the 11th century AD. Over and over again the same scenario repeated itself, with those who converted to Islam being allowed to live, and those who refused to accept the religion of peace being massacred or enslaved. In every case, their temples were destroyed, along with all the idols within them, and the remains of the temple were used to build a mosque on the former temple site. Later Turkish invasions would even be more brutal. The Turkic Seljuk tribes who had converted to Islam were no less destructive to India's largely Hindu and Buddhist population. Like the Arabs, the Turks gave the same invitation to convert or die. The contemporary Indian philosopher Swami Vivekananda said, "Their watchword is, 'There is one God, Allah and Muhammad as his prophet. Everything beyond that not only is bad, but must be destroyed forthwith, at a moment's notice. Every man or woman who does not exactly believe in that must be killed. Everything that does not belong to this worship must be immediately broken. Every book that teaches anything else must be burnt. From the Pacific to the Atlantic, for 500 years, the blood of the non-Muslims was running on earth all over the world. That is Mohammedanism, Islam. This speech was delivered at the Shakespeare Club of Pasadena, California, the USA, on February 3, 1900. He also said, "In the Quran, there is the doctrine that a man, who does not believe these teachings, should be killed. It is a mercy to kill him. And the surest way to get to heaven, where there are beautiful virgins and all sort of sense enjoyments, is by killing these unbelievers." Think of the bloodshed there has been in consequence of such beliefs, Islam. This speech was delivered by Swami Vivekananda in London on November 18, 1896. One religion may ordain something very hideous. For instance, the Mohammedan religion, Islam allows Muslims to kill all who are not of their religion. It is clearly stated in the Quran, "Kill the infidels if they do not become Mohammedans." Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 5. They must be put to fire and sword. Now, if we tell a Mohammedan that this is wrong, he will naturally ask, "How do you know that? How do you know it is not good?" My book says it is good. This speech was given in London on November 17, 1896. Swami also said, "Think of what Muhammad did to the world, and think of the great evil that has been done through his fanaticism. Think of the millions massacred through his teachings, mothers bereft of their children, children made orphans, whole countries destroyed, millions upon millions of people killed." Citing the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. According to the Belgian historian Conrad Elst, the Muslim conquests down to the 16th century were for the Hindus a pure struggle of life and death. Entire cities were burnt down and the population massacred, with hundreds of thousands killed in every campaign and similar numbers deported as slaves. Every new invader often literally built his own hills made of Hindu skulls. As a contribution to research on the quantity of the Islamic crimes against humanity, we may mention that the Indian subcontinent population decreased by 80 million between the year 1000, conquest of Afghanistan, and 1525, end of Delhi Sultanate. The American historian Will Durant states, "The Islamic conquest of India is probably the bloodiest story in history. It is a discouraging tale, for its evident moral is that civilization is a precious good, whose delicate complex of order and freedom, culture and peace can at any moment be overthrown by barbarians who are invading from without, or multiplying within through polygamy." These accounts prove to us that Islam is the bloodiest religion in human history. Muslim historians do not hide the fact that Islam was spread by the sword. The Muslim mujahideen killed millions of infidels, looted their treasures, occupied their lands, enslaved their children, raped their women, and sold their women and children in the slave markets. To Muslims, the Islamic invasions are seen as acts of altruism. They are referred to as al-Futuhat al-Islamiyya, which literally means the Islamic openings, that is, the countries that were invaded by the sword were opened for the light of Islam to enter and guide its infidel inhabitants. Thus, to Muslims, there is nothing to regret or apologize for concerning those bloody invasions. They are seen as for the good of those infidels who were defeated and forcibly Islamized. This story is to be continued in Book 3, under the title, The Christian Girl and Her Muslim Apostate Lover. About the author of this novel. Dr. Ahmed is an author and scholar. He has 5 university certificates, BA, MA, and PhD, in philosophy and comparative studies of religions from India, and a bachelor's and a master's degrees in religious studies and philosophy from Canada. He was born and brought up as a Muslim, but through his study of philosophy and comparative studies of religions, he converted to Christianity. He has a unique writing style that can break through any religious, social, and cultural barriers and reveal the truth as it is. Moreover, his books are based on first-hand eyewitnesses because he witnessed those dire conditions of Muslim women with his own eyes. He has written 25 books, but so far has published 10 of them. His books have been written in English and translated by him into Arabic. All his books are on the issues of women in Muslim societies and terrorism in Islam. His books are available on his YouTube pages as he reads them in English and Arabic.